Hey, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday. This is Chad from Ascension Worship. This week, we're going to go into some viewer email and talk about making a post-fade mix for broadcast. Hey, what do you say? Yes, it's that time again. It's Tech Tuesday. So this week, we are looking at an email that came from our friend Marlon. Marlon, I'm going to kind of condense his email here. He's asking, he has an M32, Midas M32 for those of you who aren't familiar with that. And he is trying to do a live video stream using a program called Wirecast. I'm not familiar, but it seems like it's a pretty straightforward video streaming service that you can get. He has every channel on the board seeming to go through properly except for Auxilary 1 and 2, which are his playback. So I'm assuming that's his like an iPod or the computer that's running videos. He wants to know if he's able to control the sound that goes into the live stream separately from the front of house, and how can he accomplish this? So to answer these questions, there's actually two questions I'm seeing happening here. The first one is, why is he not seeing his auxiliary channels coming through to the Wirecast console? So to answer that, first of all, you have to understand that an M32 or an X32, even though it's got 32 in the name, it's got 32 XLR inputs on the back. So here's a picture of the, there we go. Here's a picture of the back of the M32, and you can see your 32 inputs. But then you also have 6 of these TRS inputs on the back, which brings you to 38. And then finally, you can't see in this picture, but there are 2 channels technically of audio coming from the USB port on the top of the console. So you've really got 40 channels of inputs coming into the board. But when it comes to streaming, you can really only do what the card will let you do, which right here we can see a picture of the card. It will allow you to send 32 channels out at a time. Now, the way the X32 and the M32 work, if we go up here, we're looking at the editing app for the program. I'm going to click on routing, and then I've got my card out tab selected here. And you can see, zoom in a little bit here for you. Everything's in groups of 8. So I'm not going to touch on this a whole lot today, but this is the default setting where basically anything that's plugged into 1 through 32 on the back of the console is going to be what you can stream to a recording device, or in this case to Wirecast. So for you to get your auxiliary channels in there, you're going to have to change one of these entire groups of 8. And the fastest way to do that is to change, in this case, the last one. If you're only using 24 channels coming from the stage, we could change this last one to be our auxiliary ends 1 through 6 and the talkback mic. Another way you could do that, again, without getting into this too deep, is you could change it to maybe your outputs, and then you could have 2 of those outputs be direct outs from your auxiliary inputs. So there's some different ways you can kind of trick the board into working, but unfortunately, the simplicity of the X32 and M32 is that they try and keep everything in groups of 8 like this, so you will have to do a little bit of magic to make that work. However, that brings me to question B, that I think is Marlon's real question here. What we're going to focus on today is, how can he get a separate mix going to the live stream? And I'm assuming that, like most churches, he doesn't have a separate console for this, but rather he wants to be able to control better the mix that's coming from the room and send it online sounding a little bit more polished and a little bit better for an online audience. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, we're talking about post-fade mixes. If you remember from months ago back, I'll put a link at the end of the video if you want to watch it again. We talked about the different kind of auxiliary sends, and there are 2 main ones that you have to keep in mind. There is the pre-fade and the post-fade. So what a pre-fade auxiliary does is it will send a level, in this case, let's look at our kick drum. So what I'm going to do is, again, looking at the editing app, I'm going to click on the kick drum channel over here so it's selected. And when you have a channel selected, not a bus or an output, you can go here to click on Sends on Fader. And now we're looking at the bus levels that are coming off of that. So these are the different sends that the kick drum is sending to. We've got 4 different stereo groups here. We've got the recording mix that we're going to talk about today, and then 2 different ears groups. So the kick drum right now is sending a level of about -5 to the recording mix. If that were a pre-fade send, that would mean that no matter where this fader is, and this fader right now is controlling what the crowd is hearing, no matter where that fader is set to, the online audience is always going to hear -5 coming from the kick. And so we can turn this up and down, and it'll get louder and quieter for the audience, but it'll always be -5 for the online people. We don't really want that because there might be some songs where the kick needs to be louder and some where it needs to be quieter. You need to be able to control that mix from front of house, keep it real easy, so that it's not 2 completely different mixes going on, but you may need to adjust the level up and down. So in this case, we're going to do a post-fade mix, which means that the level going to the online audience is going to be affected by both these faders, and it's a simple issue of math. So right now, let's say that we have this fader. Again, this is what the audience in the church is hearing. If it's set to about -5, and then we've got this level here set to -5, that would mean that the kick drum is going to the congregation at -5 and going to the online audience at -10. Now, the reason why I have it at -5, I'm talking more about this in a little bit, is I'm kind of pulling down the things that are going to be kind of loud in the mix, so that later on when I push up the quieter things, we'll be able to hear them a little bit better. So that's the difference between pre-fade and post-fade. So the reason why you'd want to have a separate mix for online versus in your room is these reasons that we have here. The first one is adjusting for things that are physically loud in the room despite the PA system. So the most common one of these is going to be your cymbals and maybe your snare drum. If you have like a percussionist or brass section, that's going to be a common thing too, where maybe it sounds great in the room, but when you listen to it online, it sounds like it's really lacking. So a typical mix for this church that we're looking at here, they have a full-on cage, but a lot of churches that don't have a shield or a cage for their drum set, they're going to have their overhead microphones almost all the way off, and it'll sound great in the room, but online it just sounds like everything's kind of distant because you're not getting that high end. So that's where you can use a post-fade mix to your advantage, because we could take those levels. So I'm going to click on that, and again, we're seeing right now it's going -5 to the recording mix. If I want to, I could boost that up to 0 or a little bit higher. In this case, we're going to do +5. And now the overhead mics are going to be louder online than they are in the room, so that way it can sound good in both situations. And again, being post-fade, if the front of house engineer needs to turn them up for this one section where maybe it's kind of a jazzy section with some ride cymbal going on, that will automatically get louder in the recording mix as well, the broadcast mix. So these things are all working together to get you different mixes, but that are both being controlled by the same front of house mix, if you see what I mean on there. So again, really common with cymbals would be doing that. Second reason would be to boost dynamically low vocal microphones, in particular your pastor's microphone, maybe microphones that you're using for announcements. The human ear in the live room can handle the difference between talking and loud praise and worship. It's called dynamics. So from your lowest point to your highest point, the human ear will adjust for that in the real world. But in the broadcast world, there's a much smaller dynamic range. If you're listening to a worship service on your phone, the phone can't really handle that huge amount of range like with that little speaker. Either the worship's going to sound good, but the pastor's going to sound super quiet, or the pastor's going to sound good, but the worship's going to be distorted. So what we can do to kind of help bridge that gap is use these post-fade mixes to make up for that. So what I'm going to do right now, again, we're in Sense on Fader mode. I'm going to click on the bus, the record bus here. And now what we're seeing on the screen is we're seeing all the levels that are going to that bus. So if you're not familiar with this, if you click on an input, you're seeing these faders are controlling what the house is hearing. These faders are how much that selected channel is going to the buses. It's the other way around when you click on the bus. And now these are how much it's going to the house, or in this case, online. And over here is what is going into that bus. So looking at our recording mix, we can see right now I've got the entire band set to -5. And then if we go to my second layer here, we have no click in MD, which is correct. We don't want those going online. But over here, if you notice, I have boosted up the MC, or some churches call that the announcement microphone. It is 5 dB louder than all the instruments and the vocals for singing. And then the headset microphone is boosted even more than that. Because again, in a live room, you're not going to have the headset the same volume as worship for that 40-minute message. That would be very uncomfortable, and you'd probably run into feedback, all that good stuff. So what we're doing is online, you can get away with that. We're boosting that up 10 dB above all the band stuff, and that's going to fit online a whole lot better. Another reason why you might want to do this is to add ambient microphones. So again, looking at my my scene here, on the third layer, I've got some ambient mics right here, house left and house right. Now, these are actually set to be pre-fade right now because you shouldn't be using this in your in your house mix anyway. So this is purely for online. Ambient mics are great for getting the band's ears to sound better, so they'll keep their ears in and not damage their hearing. But for broadcast, it's really good because what it'll allow you to do is get the sounds of the room, most notably the reactions that people have to the pastor and to the band, so that it doesn't feel like it's this closed-off environment. Especially if you have a single static shot camera where they're seeing the stage online, but they're not seeing the crowd. It can feel really uncomfortable, and if people are judging whether they want to come visit your church or not based off of that, that's not a great first impression. But if they hear people reacting, it's going to make your online presence a lot better right away. And then fourth, you can adjust for effects levels. When everything's done, your mix is probably going to go through a process called limiting. Limiting is what happens to a final recording to make it to where it's a nice loud volume for a CD, or in this case for online. When you do that, it squishes that dynamic range down even more. So the louder stuff comes down, and then the whole mix can come up. And as a side effect of that, your quieter things are going to become more noticeable. In particular, your effects. So like the tails on reverb and delay will become more noticeable and might sound a little bit overly wet on a recording. So again, looking at my mix here, I can go to my effects returns, and you can see those are turned down even lower than the band. They're turned down to -10. So that way I can have as much reverb as I want in the live room, but it will always be 5 dB quieter. 10 dB quieter online. And of course, you can adjust these things from week to week until you get that perfect mix that you want. Finally, when you're done doing all this, again, you can see that most of my levels have been turned down so that there's more headroom for the pastor to be turned up. In the end, you're going to want to boost this up, do that limiting we were talking about so that it will sound nice and loud online. Because there's nothing worse than if you're trying to watch a worship service on your phone, pastor goes up to speak, and you have to have the phone like right in your ear to hear it. So to do that, I've got it set up on here really quickly. I'll show you what we've got. So I've got my recording bus selected. I'm going to click on the effects button here. And because I've already loaded this up, it's come up. But I have set up the precision limiter on the bus so that what we're going to hear online is going to be a little bit more boosted up. And this is a super watered down explanation of how to set one of these. But what I would do is when worship's going and you're kind of at your peak volume, start to turn up your input gain until you start to see this GR, which is gain reduction, start to happen a little bit. A safe bet would be get it to where it's just tapping. So that means that you are pushing your worship volume to where it's kind of at the max of what's going to go online. Otherwise, you can kind of compare it to other worship services that are online. If you're doing it more than hitting -6 or -9, then you're probably overdoing it, and it's going to sound distorted and like it has no life to it online. So there's definitely an art to doing this, and I would say it's better to go easy on it than to push it too hard. And then if you're having to push it loud to get the pastor to come out louder in the final mix, but the band sounds good, then just go and turn the pastor up on the post-fade mix. One more thing that I forgot to mention, if you are setting this up for the first time, one fast way to do it in the X32 or M32 is to select your mix bus. In this case, I've already got them linked, so they are a stereo pair. And we're going to go up to the config tab, and we're going to tell it to be post-fade. Now, I'm not going to do that right now because I've already done this, but what it'll do is it'll change everything that's going to that bus to be post-fade. Now, the reason why mine says select is because I have everything post-fade except for the Ambient Mics. Remember, we wanted those to be pre-fade. Finally, again, to get this online, you're going to need to get it out of the board somehow to your computer. And so, as Marlon was asking, he's using the USB out. So to do that, you're going to need to click on Routing, have your card out set, and then you need to change one of these groups of 8 to something that can contain, in this case, buses 1 and 2. So what I typically do is I would change, in this case, I'm going to change my outputs 1 through 8 to out 1 through 8. And then on my out tabs, I would change out 1 to be mix bus 1, and out 2 to be mix bus 2, post fade, and you'd be done. You can also do the same thing with just doing this, and it'll come out your XLR outs on the back, or you can do all your auxiliary outs and same deal, mix bus 1, mix bus 2, and that would work for you. So we hope this has been helpful for you and for your team. If you have any questions, please email me. It's TechTuesday@ascensionworship.com. And again, we do read those. In fact, this video is a response to an email that was sent to us a little while back. So until next time, have a great week. Again, this is Chad from Ascension Worship. I hope this has been helpful for you and your team. Come back here every Tuesday for new information.